Hi, I'm AJ Cueve, and welcome to Source Material, the show where I take an adapted work and compare it to the material it's based on. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at Kingsman, the Secret Service.
Welcome to Kingsman.
Kingsman, the Secret Service came out in 2014 and was directed and co-written by Matthew Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn also helped direct Kick-Ass, which may or may not be an upcoming episode, X-Men First Class, Kingsman the Golden Circle, and the upcoming prequel The Kingsman. Along with Mr. Vaughn, it was also co-written by Jane Goldman. Ms. Goldman also helped co-write Kick-Ass. You know what? Yes, I will be doing a Kick-Ass episode in the future. X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, The Woman in Black, and the upcoming Little Mermaid live-action film. This movie also marks the feature film debut of Taron Egerton. Technically, Testament of Youth came out first, but apparently Kingsman was shot beforehand. He would go on to star in movies like Eddie the Eagle, the recent Robin Hood remake, and more prominently, his role as Elton John in Rocketman. The film also stars Colin Firth, Sam Jackson, Mike O'Kane, Mark Strong, and Sophia Boutella? Chick who was in the Mummy reboot that killed the Monster Universe. The movie was met with positive reviews and currently, at the time of this video, sits at 74% critic and 84% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. It also has a sequel, Kingsman the Golden Circle, which came out in 2017, and a prequel, The Kingsman, set to come out next year, 2020. The story is about Eggsy, a street hoodlum on the wrong side of the tracks, whom a gentleman spy offers to take under his wing as a Kingsman secret agent. During his training, Valentine, rich internet mogul, wants to lower the Earth's population by making everybody kill each other. It's up to the Kingsmen to stop him, which they do, happily ever after, except for the gentleman spy, kind of. How does this compare to the comic book it's based on? Well, let's get to the source material. The Secret Service came out in 2012 by Image and was written by Mark Miller. Mr. Miller is one of my favorite writers and responsible for a lot of iconic series that I'll more than likely do episodes on, such as Kick-Ass, Civil War, Old Man Logan, Superman Red Sun, Superior, Nemesis, and Wanted. Mr. Miller also wrote Marvel's The Ultimates, which was a huge inspiration for the MCU. Secret Service was drawn by comic legend Dave Gibbons, who's most noted for his work on Watchmen. Yes, everybody, I will be doing an episode on Watchmen. Thank you very much for the countless recommendations to do so. The comic ran for 6 issues and was almost immediately greenlit for a movie. Let's talk about the similarities between the comic and the movie. Actually, a lot more than people would expect. Almost all of the movie's tentpole moments came directly from the comic. Cliché spy goes to save Mark Hamill and dies. Mischievous youth with a bad home life gets arrested for stealing a car. Gets out of jail thanks to Gentleman Spy, who beats up some punks in a bar. Youth goes to training to be a spy himself. Bad guy wants a giant culling in order to save the Earth and demonstrates how his cell phone-based tech will cause people to kill each other. Youth is a natural during his training but ultimately doesn't make it. Youth gets a makeover by Gentleman Spy. Gentleman Spy is killed suddenly. Big Boss Man is a traitor. Youth gets his fellow trainees to stop the bad guy in a mountain lair. Bad guy dies, good guys win. All things considered, the spirit and the story is basically the same. All of the big characters from the comic make it to the movie, with the exception of Ambrosia, who's the villain's girlfriend in the comic. Now let's talk about the differences. A big change in the film is the emphasis of being a gentleman, which I thought was fantastic. While there are moments like this that exist in the comic, it's nowhere near as prominent as the film.
Oxfords, not brogues.
There's also no King Arthur-esque codenames, and the character of Merlin was changed pretty substantially from his role in the comic. Although all the tentpole moments are the same, how the story gets there and what happens can be significantly different. Something that I absolutely love is how Mark Hamill's in both stories. In the comic books, Mark Hamill plays himself. Literally, a spy is sent to rescue Mark Hamill, and they even make some Star Wars prequel jokes. In the movie, however, he plays a character named Dr. Arnold, which is actually the name of the villain from the original comic. This leads to one of the biggest changes, which is the characters. In the comics, the main character is a neighborhood street punk named Gary London. In the movie, however, he's still a neighborhood street punk, but he's also a Marine training dropout who goes by Eggsy. Although in the film they do pepper in that his real name is Gary Eggsy Unwin. Unwin, London, I'll take it. Harry Hart's name in the original comic is actually Jack London, and instead of owing his life to Gary's dad, he's actually Gary's uncle. This is a more significant change, and I believe that by changing the role from estranged uncle to dead stranger actually makes for a more likable character. Muscle to the main villain and legless Fatale Gazelle was actually a man in the comics, but one of the biggest changes comes from the main villain. The comic villain is certainly no lisping Sam Jackson. Instead of Valentine, his name is Dr. James Arnold, a genius cell phone mogul that's very much a nerd. This is actually crucial to the plot, because in the movie, the only people spared are the world leaders and the elite, with a few jokes about people like Iggy Azalea being kidnapped. In the comics, however, the only ones spared are the people that the nerdy doctor admire, people like Mark Hamill, Pierce Brosnan, Patrick Stewart, David Beckham, and almost Ridley Scott. Another big change is the training, which I actually prefer in the comics. Instead of an admittedly cool water scene, sniping, skydiving, and final puppy test, Gary's thrown into the streets to learn real-life persuasion techniques. There's also this huge scene in the comics where Jack knocks out Gary and leaves him stranded in South America with nothing, only saying that he has to get home by a certain time or he's out. The training in the comics is a lot more mystery Mr. Miyagi instead of straightforward. The most iconic scene in the movie is the church scene, where the villain uses his device to cause the Westboro Baptist-type churchgoers and Harry to rip each other apart in a really cool mock single-take action scene. In the comics, however, this scene happens a lot earlier and Jack/Harry isn't there. Also, instead of it being a bunch of hateful churchgoers, you have a bunch of brides and grooms about to get married. So instead of dying in that scene, Jack in the comics is actually trying to seduce the Doctor's girlfriend when his bodyguard Gazelle randomly kills him. They were unaware he was a Kingsman agent, and his death was completely out of nowhere. And I also know that technically in Kingsman the Golden Circle it's revealed that Harry survived the shots at the head, but in the comic books, he is very, very much dead. Another big change is when Eggsy/Gary comes home from his training and sees that his mom's been beat up by her abusive boyfriend. In the movie, as he approaches the boyfriend, he gets whisked away by Harry and he's denied any chance to actually get his revenge. In the comics, however, he very much gets his revenge, and I actually prefer this because this just feels really good to see an abusive boyfriend get his comeuppance. There's a mid-credit scene in the movie that shows that Eggsy does get this moment later, but it's all insinuated. A scene that I wish would have made it into the movie instead of just being a teaser in the mid-credits is the scene in the comics where Gary's mom is gifted with a new apartment away from her abusive boyfriend. It was a touching moment with Gary and Jack, and I think it really would have worked on screen. Another big change in the film was the villain's plan actually working, at least for a moment. This is a significant change considering that in the comics, they rewired the machine so that instead of sending a signal that makes everyone want to murder each other, it makes everybody want to love each other, and thus begins a worldwide makeout session, which I absolutely believe is the better ending. The last change I'll mention is actually the biggest. In the movie, the agency Eggsy works for is called Kingsman, a private spy agency that'll be further explained in the upcoming prequel. In the comics, however, the spies are MI6, the real-life Secret Service to the British government, hence Secret Service. In fact, the name Kingsman isn't even mentioned in the original comics. During my research for this episode, I tried looking up the trade paperback for the Secret Service, but all I could find was Kingsman. I was beginning to wonder if I was experiencing some kind of Bernstein Bears type situation. All I could find was Kingsman the Secret Service, not just the Secret Service. I had the original 6 issues, so I pulled them out and saw that I wasn't crazy. It turns out, after the massive success of the movie, Image rebranded the series, changing the name from the Secret Service to Kingsman the Secret Service, even going so far as to changing the dialogue in the comics, replacing MI6 with Kingsman. This is a big no-no to me. Yes, I'm a big fan of the film franchise and it's very successful, but that shouldn't warrant rewriting history. Fans hate that George Lucas keeps going back and releasing changed versions of Star Wars. This is the same thing. The comic book and the movie were both successful in their own right, and going back and changing the comic to adopt the movie just seems disrespectful to the original creators and to fans of the original series. Heck, the name Eggsy isn't even mentioned in the original series. But since the rebrand, they changed the character's name to Eggsy and even featured Taron Egerton's face as the cover for Kingsman the Red Diamond issue 1. I loved the comic when it came out because it was a fun take on the spy genre. The movie used the spirit of the comic and adapted it into something almost entirely new. I don't fault the movie for its changes, and in fact, I actually think it's a great example of what an adaptation should be. Not every adaptation needs to be a carbon copy of its source material. Instead, a good adaptation should use the strengths of its medium to better the story, which I firmly believe Kingsman did. It hit all the marks from the comic and even went on to spawn its own franchise that's both fun and self-aware. It's safe to say that the film version is now its own entity, and I love it. There are elements from both mediums that I prefer, but all in all, I gotta say I prefer the film adaptation. This shouldn't be much of a shock considering even the comic itself seems to prefer the film adaptation. If you have another adaptation you'd like for me to take a look at, let me know in the comments below or send me an email to genregeekscast@gmail.com. I want to give a quick shout out to the comic book movie subreddit who have been incredibly supportive of this show so far. I'm AJ Cueve, and I'll see you next time.